Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. In our last video, we talked about the real threat the Empire faced, a massive debt pileup that was created by the Clone Wars and then inherited by the Galactic Empire. Now, even before Palpatine tried to spend his way out of this crisis with no cash reserves, this was already the biggest threat the galaxy faced. It's not as exciting as Abeloth or the Yuzhang Vong, but the failure of the galactic economy and the Imperial credits would mean a complete halt to the entire economic system. And with so many worlds depending on food shipments and energy imports from off-world, that'd be a huge disaster. Coruscant would probably collapse into chaos pretty quickly. What is it that they say about major cities and how they usually only have 3 or 4 days worth of food in their supermarkets? I think there are also a lot of space stations that will have to be abandoned pretty quickly as well. I imagine as this crisis grows larger, a lot of military, political, and business leaders will just try to seize control of the real value in the galaxy. Again, foodstuff, energy, products that are being made, and these individuals will try to create their own personal kingdoms. We'll end up seeing new currencies pop up out of nowhere backed by these warlords. Probably be a barter system in place of the galactic economy, which really just is an efficient way to move around money. So you really can't have larger business deals or construction plans because it just requires a lot of resources that usually just can't be raised by one individual. And the death and destruction that will happen during this period of time will make major conflicts between the Jedi and Sith pale in comparison. Kids like to talk about lightsaber battles and, duels of the fates. But if you really want to know what's happening in the galaxy, you kind of got to focus on the credits and where they're going. That or you can live on Tatooine, where either way you're going to be squeezing water out of air. Which honestly is like the most nihilist profession I've ever heard of. Anyway, Palpatine tried to restructure this inherited debt from the Republic. He tried to hide it in the Empire's new currency. He also probably had to Order 66 all the economists aside from Peter Navarro so that they couldn't, blow up what he was doing to the public. Palpatine even started an ill-advised military ramp-up while the galaxy was at peace in order to create some type of economic activity. At first, all of these workers were paid, but eventually, the Empire just started relying on essentially slave labor and prison labor. Which might seem free, but I assure you, it is not. The amount of damage that these type of labor systems can do to the economy is massive. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Why slave labor is not only morally reprehensible, that's very easy to talk about. Let's also explain why, from a practical and economic point of view, why it's probably one of the most destructive things you can do to your economy, so that no one is ever stupid enough to try this again. The best economic systems try to preserve healthy competition because that is ultimately what drives innovation, which can create massive returns in efficiency and values. Now, with any kind of business venture, a good deal of your costs are going to go towards labor to produce a type of good or service. Labor has always been one of the most dynamic parts of the equation of how to do business, and that's because labor pushes back. It demands better conditions usually, it wants better pay, and that is an important dynamic to keep things balanced in larger society, especially a society where a robust free market exists, like in the Galactic Republic. Now, let's say you have 2 different moisture farmers working on Tatooine. Farmer 1 has the largest plot of land in the area, he has the most condensers in play, and Farmer 1 utilizes a very large labor force of ruffians from nearby Mos Espa to maintain and extract water from all of his water fields. Because Farmer 1 is able to scale up his operations so much, he's able to sell his water at extremely low levels, which is good for the local populace, but also drives other small moisture farmers out of business. He undercuts them way too much. Now, Farmer 2 is his neighbor. He has a much smaller operation. He has much less land and less condensers. He also employs less ruffians, also from Espa, to basically work his fields. Farmer 2 can't sell water at Farmer 1's discounted prices because he just doesn't have scale. He also notices that his workers occasionally steal small amounts of water from the shipments, which also cuts into his bottom line. Farmer 1 has armed thugs from Jabba acting as enforcers, so it doesn't happen. Farmer 2 cannot afford this. And so what does he do? Well, he goes to the Jawas, and he puts together a small droid team that is able to do everything an organic team can, but at a much lower price than even Farmer 1 can do. Better yet, there's no theft, no laziness, no complaints, and these robots can work all year round. Farmer 2 has invested money into this specific industry to completely change the game. It's very likely that other moisture farms will have to follow suit because of these changes he's made. And one could argue that working on a moisture farm is too dangerous and difficult anyway for living beings, and so the automation of these jobs is a net positive for society. Although the people are harshly called ruffians hanging out in Mos Espa might disagree with that sentiment. Now let's say there's a third farmer. Farmer 3. And Farmer 3 operates a pretty decent sized farm, and all of his labor is free in the form of slaves. Farmer 3 bought these slaves from the huts, and the only thing he really needs to keep them in check are tiny little bombs he's implanted in their heads. His initial cost for operation and maintenance of this operation is lower than both Farm 1 and Farm 2. If Farmer number 3 exists using slave labor, I would argue that it's very difficult for Farmer 1 and Farmer 2 to exist, who are either using actual paid labor, and the second one innovates to use more advanced forms of labor. It's possible that Farmer 2, the farmer with the droids, might be able to eventually undercut Farmer 3, the slave farmer, and that's by, upscaling and using efficiency, but the initial investment for buying a bunch of droids can be quite high compared to using slaves, especially if Farmer 3 got their slaves the same way that the Empire did, either as prisoners of war when fighting against dissidents and separatist holdouts, or just by creating phony charges and filling the prison with free labor. Either way, if slavery enters your labor market, it is going to shake up things, and I think in the long term, it's going to create a lot of issues. Now, if slavery already controls a specific market, then it also becomes difficult for alternative methods of labor to compete against it. So contrary to popular belief, slavery does not only hurt the individuals that are being enslaved, it hurts everyone involved. It hurts the entire economy. It prevents innovation and creates stagnation. I do have to point out, though, in one specific case, technological advancements actually did lead to more slavery, as was the case with the invention of the cotton gin in 1793 by Eli Whitney. His machine automated the separation of cotton fibers from the seeds, a very difficult and painful process that used to be done by hand. This machine sped up the process so much that there was actually an increase for demand for specifically American cotton, which of course led to more slaves being caught and shipped over to the United States, because the demand was just that high. This shows us how important it is to eliminate slavery as a means of labor, because it can easily be paired with advanced technologies as well and produce horrific consequences. On the flip side, this might be a positive message to everyone fearing what these large language models are going to do to the labor markets. I think there are definitely going to be threats in a lot of, entry-level positions, but I think automation will definitely create more jobs, as well as workers become more efficient. So there's that side to it as well. The core problem with slavery is that you're holding people against their will and forcing them to work for profit against their will. And so while you're not spending any money on incentives to get these people to work, you still technically are spending money to convince these people to work, but usually in the form of creating violence and pain with money, rather than just giving it to them directly. And it's not cheap. It never is. Take the Narkina 5 prison complex, for instance, a meticulously designed prison complex that was really just a shadowy prison labor complex that produced hull plating for the Death Star. It's very clear that whoever designed this prison went through many different iterations, learning from each one of the earlier experiments on how to trap sentient beings like rats and force them to make intergalactic versions of license plates. Yes, we're told that the Narkina 5 prison complex is state-of-the-art and extremely efficient thanks to the unique electrified tungstoid floors. Narkina 5 has a very small garrison of wardens watching over a huge prison population as a result. But are we really glossing over the fact that you built this crazy-looking massive Durasteel construction mostly underwater in a very remote part of the galaxy? This was definitely not something that was very cheap to build, and any money you save on maintenance clearly was lost in the construction of what is a very, very expensive looking building. I understand that, Palpatine carried out large infrastructure programs like the ones that built Narkina 5 to help boost the economy, but spending this much money just so that you can keep people trapped in a factory to do work is highly inefficient and impractical. In a normal functioning society, people just volunteer their, time to do work in exchange for money. It's a proven system. It works. Putting a gun to the head of your labor and forcing them to do work, again, that is so short-sighted. It's just not something that works in the long run. And the more people you have working, the more people you'll have to have pointing guns at them, and this is a cost that will never go down and will constantly need to be maintained. How many people do you think the rebellion recruited straight out of an Imperial prison? It's probably a lot. Cassian Andor alone recruited Jyn Erso from a prison labor camp. He also got Melshi from Narkina 5, and he also rescued Bix Kalean from the ISB. If Jyn, Melshi, and Bix hadn't been against the Empire before their incarceration, now they had a real reason to rebel. Turns out turning your prisoners into cheap labor or employing slaves really pisses off people, not only the actual slaves and prisoners themselves, who often turn against the Empire once they escape, but also every other living person who finds out about this system, because again, no one likes slavery. No one wants to see prisoners become labor. Funny thing is, when you move the Overton window towards understanding how evil slavery is, it becomes pretty difficult to support something like this ever again. Even Imperial propaganda has difficulty in explaining its actions here. This is the real moral hazard of being a part of a system that uses this type of labor. This will essentially taint everything else you try to do. For instance, right now, Immigration and Customs Enforcement in the United States is arresting record amounts of undocumented migrants. If you're against people breaking the law and entering the country illegally without documentation, I understand why you would support this. Some people are born naturally on the side of law and order, and some people are more rebellious, and then, your life experience kind of paints everything in between. But yeah, some of us just have this personality, and that in itself is not a problem. But the process of deporting someone can take weeks, if not months, if not years sometimes. And the US doesn't really have all that excess capacity to hold people if there's a sudden influx. It just makes no sense to actually have permanent facilities out there that aren't, being used. In the United States, unfortunately, throughout its history, even under the rule of Democrats like Biden and Obama, have had issues detaining these immigrants. And so seeing children being placed in cages at our border is not just a Trump thing, and unfortunately is also a Democrat thing. And this is visually a very difficult image to explain to people without, prefacing it with several paragraphs of apologies and explanation. In a political sense, this is a huge loss from a viewer perspective. So who is filling this gap in our prison system right now? Well, unfortunately, it's been for-profit private prison companies. And when I'm not doing Star Wars, I'm a value investor. I've been one for a really long time. That's how I generate most of my wealth and my money. And when you read the profit statements or just the quarterly reports from a for-profit prison, it is some of the vilest and most evil kind of stuff you'll ever see. I mean, they basically normalize this. They normalize the business of looking at a prisoner as essentially an asset on a spreadsheet rather than someone who you're supposed to rehabilitate. Certain things should not be seen through the lens of profitability. Certain things should be done by the government, which is far less efficient and really bad at managing money. But you cannot have private prison companies taking over these responsibilities because the room for corruption and abuse is huge. This is why I don't touch these companies either. Not just because I'm a good person. I think there's something just very chaotic about these companies, and this is why you should not put your money in them. So ever since this administration has started ramping up the amount of deportations, you have companies like CoreCivic and Geo Group who have really stepped up and filled this gap in the federal prison system. I mean, they're winning contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars to basically hold these individuals until they've had their day in court and they can be deported. And both of these companies donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Trump campaign in 2024, and their stock prices shot up a lot after Election Day. CoreCivic's stock price, for instance, went up almost 100% within a few days. Now, do I think that Trump collaborated with these prison groups just to increase the amount of deportation so that they can make more money off of contracts? No, I don't think so. I think that's kind of stupid. But even the most ardent Trump supporter has to acknowledge that this is really a bad thing for him to do. Visually, it's extremely hard to defend this kind of behavior, this collusion between the private prison system and the federal government. It's not pretty. I mean, you can even argue that the Democrats have also used these company services prior to this, right? This is not a specifically Republican problem. This is an American problem. The Republicans just seem to really enjoy kicking immigrants out of the country in a really disgusting way. But yeah, Trump didn't create this company. He just embraced it more than any other president ever has. And this is a huge mistake. I think the opposition is really keying in on the lack of humanity that ICE enforcement is giving to a lot of these immigrant families. And, whether that's fair or not, right? You can compare what this administration has done to Democratic administrations, and you can find some similarities. But again, it doesn't really matter because the optics are what's important. And this is why the rebellion, once they figured out Narkina 5 was a thing, they spread that information out everywhere. Remember, Melshi, after that incident, he said, hey, it's really important for me to tell the galaxy what's happening. He understood his role here to uncover the Empire's crime and use that as fuel for the opposition. The Public Order and Resentencing Directive was seen by many as a retaliation against the Aldani depository heist. But let's take a closer look at the actual words of the policy. The tribute of 400 million credits levied on any system harboring partisan activity. Well, that will have a huge effect on already struggling systems dealing with civil unrest, because usually partisan activity does not happen in a loyal imperial world. It usually happens in a peripheral world that is struggling, usually struggling because of economic issues. Less government, a massive fine of 400 million credits that essentially empties government coffers means less money for security enforcement, less money for social services, which probably equals more poverty and economic unrest. So this kind of punitive measure doesn't actually help. PORD also reevaluates and doubles all sentences for crimes that affect the empire. This is a very vague and powerful tool. It will be used unfairly, and I think it will turn more people against the empire. There's also a suspension of all fine and levy payments, which means that any person who has cut a deal with the government to slowly pay off their fines because maybe they can't afford to will now be forced to either pay or go to jail. Finally, you have the classification of all anti-imperial offenses, even small ones like, I don't know, saying that Palpatine's face looks like a scrotum, is now going to be considered as a Class 1 offense, aka a first-degree felony. If you take a look at this directive, all of the things inside of it are pointing towards one thing. They're trying to imprison more people. They're trying to pull more able-bodied slaves into their prison labor complex. It's a cartoonishly evil move because every person you remove from society equals one less contributor, one less customer for goods and services, one less taxpayer to help support government funding. This has always been my warning against like authoritarians and people who support the capitalist system without really understanding like the negative side aspects of it. Anyone who thinks that they can just be at the top and enjoy everything without taking care of the people below them, the consumer class, the middle class, is grossly underestimating their own power and ability to maintain power. Watching your assets appreciate the market because you've made the right choices as an investor, it feels great, right? Like you did it. You kind of made a lot of money. You predicted something. That's awesome. Good. And watching all your assets go up now because, let's be honest, the market is just a great inflation hedge while everyone else's money is devaluing is not a good thing. If you're at the top of anything, doesn't it make sense to look down below you and see if the foundation beneath your feet is firm and solid? If you're literally throwing people into prison to make small short-term profits on them, I can assure you, in a very short period of time, not only will you not be enjoying your profits, you'll find yourself being chased by an angry mob. The bigger problem is that mob that is chasing you, used to stand on top of them. They used to provide stability for your rule, and now it's all gone. The usage of prison labor or slave labor by its very nature is unnatural and requires massive amounts of resources to maintain. For such a system to appear in the Galactic Empire was really a sign of just how unsustainable Palpatine's plans actually were. If you want to make money, if you want to create real economic growth, there really are no shortcuts, there are no hacks. You can't just exploit people, throw them into prison, and use their free labor. Every effect has a counter effect, even if you are a Sith Lord. You see, people in America think that making money is what's important in this world, but once you actually understand how to generate wealth, it's very important how you generate that wealth. If you generate money in a horrible, exploitative way, if you pump and dump meme coins, the amount of damage that will come back towards you is always going to be greater or equal to the amount of damage that you cause. That's just how the universe works. You can call it karma, you can call it intuition, but that is how things work. People who commit major crime and fraud at the national level or the international level are extremely stupid. A lot of people think that they're smart, but they're stupid because anything that they gain, anything that they manage to steal, they will spend the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders trying to protect. Dictators who exploit their people suffer a similar fate. They typically don't get to die peacefully in their sleep. They probably can't sleep because they're constantly going through all the people they screwed over in their head. This has always been really obvious to me. I've always rationalized morality as something that I wanted to do in my life. I'm not a religious person. I don't come to morality from God tells me to do this, so I'm going to do it. It's just I want to rationally be a good person because I know that if I treat my friends well, if I treat my business partners well, if I make sure that when I make money, when I do things, I'm doing it in a positive way, I know there's just less of a chance of some angry, disgruntled person coming up and trying to screw me over or, focus their energy on doing that. So I have to focus my energy in defending myself. It's just like the less you stir up, the easier things get. And I think you're either really stupid or you lack the skill and capabilities of doing something. Those are the type of people who usually settle for, like, you know, pump and dump schemes to steal money from people, or who become dictators because they're not actually capable of ruling things because they're incompetent people. I mean, it's confused me when world leaders do crazy things like Putin invading Ukraine. Putin had amazing oil revenue growth for like 20 years because of Germany and Europe building those pipelines. Why did he do that? Why did he throw everything away? I mean, he almost won. He almost won as the dictator of Russia. He could have continued, generating hundreds of billions of dollars off of European oil revenues. But no, he chooses to invade Ukraine. It's not just immoral, it's stupidity. It's so dumb. Or like Palpatine, depending on prison labor in his final act to create his military. Like, how did he think this was actually going to be sustainable? For me, these are such irrational moves that will place them in such danger and destroy their ability to maintain power that I am just utterly confused why they would put themselves in this kind of position. And maybe that's because I don't understand, nor do I desire power in the way that these crazy people do. And I guess that's like the mindset I wish more people had, like instead of looking at these dictators as these, these business people who scam their way to the top, instead of looking at them as like, wow, powerful, amazing individuals who have done amazing things with their lives, who've accomplished so much, let's look at them for what they really are, which are like sick, lonely, weird people who are unable to actually function in normal society. And so they choose to steal, they choose to hurt people, they choose to, put people in horrible positions because they don't know how to interact with people. Palpatine's idea of a safe galaxy, of a galaxy in his vision, was just him at the top alone. I mean, how lonely is that existence? Who in the right mind would actually want that kind of system where they're just by themselves completely at the top? Yeah, I don't know. All of this seems really obvious to me. Like, I don't even understand why I have to make these videos. But then again, sometimes I see what's happening in the world today, and I see how, like, a lot of the structures that used to protect us from crazy people, from madmen, from psychopaths, seem to be under assault by the very people that we're supposed to be protected from, by these systems. And that worries me. That's why I spend so much time talking about these kind of issues. Like, Star Wars is important for me. Making money on this channel is important for me. But I think, like, the larger picture is, like, does it really matter if my stupid little YouTube channel is successful? If people aren't really understanding the messages from Andor or from the larger Star Wars universe, which is really just a love letter about why we need to constantly be vigilant in protecting democracy, right? There's really no other reason why you would dive so deeply into this content. Anyway, guys, that's my video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.